To my certain knowledge, Emma Smith is one of the damnedest liars I know of on this earth. Yet there is no good thing I would refuse to do for her, if she would only be a righteous woman. But she will continue in her wickedness. Not 6 months before the death of Joseph, he called his wife Emma into a secret council, and there he told her the truth, and called upon her to deny it if she could. He told her that the judgments of God would come upon her forthwith if she did not repent. He told her of the time she undertook to poison him, and he told her that she was a child of hell, and literally the most wicked woman on this earth, that there was not one more wicked than she. He told here where she got the poison, and how she put it in a cup of coffee. Said he, "You got that poison from so-and-so, and I drank it. But you could not kill me." When it entered his stomach, he went to the door and threw it off. He spoke to her in that council in a very severe manner, and she never said one word in reply. I have witnesses of this scene all round, who can testify that I am now telling the truth. Twice she undertook to kill him.
Emma, the elect lady, twice trying to poison Joseph, is a far cry from the faith-promoting films put out by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But these are the testimonies of those who were actually there. Nauvoo was supposed to be the beautiful city, but Brigham's wasn't the only accusation of poisoning there. Joseph's brother William, an LDS apostle and the presiding patriarch of the church, also accused Brigham of poisoning their brother Samuel to assume leadership of the church.
I have good reason for believing that my brother Samuel H. Smith died of poison at Nauvoo, administered by order of Brigham Young and Willard Richards, only a few weeks subsequent to the unlawful murder of my other brothers, Joseph and Hiram Smith, while incarcerated in Carthage Jail. Several other persons who were presumed to stand between Brigham Young and the accomplishment of his ambitions and wicked designs mysteriously disappeared from Nauvoo about the same time, and have never since been heard from.
The month before Joseph was killed, his scribe William Clayton recorded in his journal that Joseph had named Samuel as his successor. Samuel's widow and daughter also supported William's claims of poisoning. Even Joseph Smith wasn't exempt from accusations of poisoning. William Law was Smith's second counselor in the first presidency. He accused Smith in an interview.
"The letters you wrote me made me suppose that the Smiths tried to kill you when they saw an enemy in you."
They tried to get rid of me in different ways. One was by poisoning. I was already out of the church when Hiram called one day and invited me for the next day to a reconciliation dinner, as he called it, to his house. He said Joseph would come too. He invited me and my wife. He was very urgent about the matter, but I declined the invitation. Now, I must tell you that I, in those dangerous days, did not neglect to look out somewhat for the safety of my person, and that I kept a detective or two among those who were in the confidence of the Smiths. That very same evening of the day on which Hiram had been to my house inviting me, my detective told me that they had conceived the plan to poison me at the reconciliation dinner. Their object was a double one. My going to the dinner would have shown to the people that I was reconciled, and my death would have freed them of an enemy. You may imagine that I didn't regret having declined that amiable invitation.
Have you had any knowledge of cases of poisoning in Nauvoo ordered by the authorities?
I know that several men, 6 or 7, died under very suspicious circumstances. Among them were 2 secretaries of the Prophet, Mulholland and Blaskell Thompson. I saw Mulholland die, and the symptoms looked very suspicious to me. Dr. Foster, who was a very good physician, believed firmly that those 6 or 7 men had been poisoned, and told me so repeatedly.
What may have been the reason for poisoning the secretaries?
They knew too much, probably.
Latter-day Saints tend to dismiss any accusations against their prophets as baseless slanders. But this was Brigham accusing Emma of poisoning Joseph. Joseph's brother, an apostle, accusing Brigham of poisoning several people, including Joseph's other brother. And a member of the First Presidency, accusing Joseph of trying to poison him and killing several others. As unbelievable as all this may sound, William Law was actually the third member of the First Presidency to accuse Smith of threatening his life. The first was Oliver Cowdery, one of the three original witnesses to the Book of Mormon. By 1838, he and the other two witnesses had broken with Smith. Among the issues were what Cowdery called Smith's dirty, nasty, filthy affair with Fanny Alger. The church today claims Smith was not committing adultery with his housemaid, but that she was actually his first plural wife. The problem is that not only was Cowdery, the assistant president of the church, apparently unaware of this, but it was years before the revelation of polygamy in Doctrine and Covenants 132. There was also the issue of what Martin Harris and others called Smith's fraud in the Kirtland Bank. Even when the state refused him a charter, Smith set up a bank and issued paper money that was supposed to be backed by silver and gold held in its vaults. Member of the 70, Cyrus Smalling, also broke with Smith, and he later wrote,
"The way that Smith contrived to deceive them was this. He had some 100 or 200 boxes made, and gathered all the lead and shot that the village had, or that part of it that he controlled, and filled the boxes with lead, shot, etc., and marked them $1,000 each. Then, when they went to examine the vault, he had one box on a table, partly filled for them to see, and when they proceeded to the vault, Smith told them that the church had $200,000 in specie, and he opened one box, and they saw that it was silver, and they hefted a number, and Smith told them that they contained specie. Thus they continued to pass and sell the worthless stuff until they sold it at 12.5 cents on the dollar, and so eager to put it off at that they could not attend meeting on the Sabbath."
Joseph's scribe, Warren Parrish, had also been bank treasurer. In a letter to the editor, he said Smith had declared that the audible voice of God had instructed him to establish a banking, anti-banking institution, which, like Aaron's rod, should swallow up all other banks. He said Smith issued paper money in excess of $150,000, when the bank only had $6,000 with which to back it. He also said the Mormon leaders lie by revelation, swindle by revelation, run away by revelation, and if they do not mend their ways, I fear they will at last be damned by revelation. Parrish was joined in the letter by Apostles Luke Johnson and John Boynton, along with two members of the 70s. LDS today will often point to the collapse of other banks during the Panic of 1837, but the panic began in May, and the Kirtland Bank had ceased redeeming its notes in January. Also, long after the bank had closed, members continued passing its notes as genuine. In May, newspapers reported that Mormon runners were going throughout the state, buying all the horses they could find with the now worthless notes. In July, Sarah Cleveland was jailed in Niagara, New York for trying to pass $390 in notes. She would later become Emma's first counselor in the Relief Society and one of Joseph's polygamous wives. In August, it was reported that the bank was printing new notes long after it had ceased redeeming them with gold or silver. The collapse of the bank left many broke, and Kirtland in an economic depression. Oliver Cowdery and David Whitmer soon moved to lands they still owned in far west Missouri. In January 1838, Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon also fled to far west to escape lawsuits and a warrant for their arrest. The presence of the dissenters in their midst led to President Sidney Rigdon preaching a sermon on June 17, 1838, in which he compared them to salt that had lost its savor and must be trodden underfoot. Smith followed the sermon with his public agreement. A few days later, Cowdery, Whitmer, Apostle Lyman Johnson, and two other dissenters were presented with a letter from 83 Danites, or Daughters of Zion as they were originally known. The signers included Joseph's bodyguard, Porter Rockwell, and the group's leader, Dr. Sampson of Ard. the Danites told the men they would remove them from Caldwell County, Missouri. They were told to depart, or a more fatal calamity shall befall you. Such hostility to dissent may seem odd to the modern church, but it was consistently described by those who knew Joseph.
Smith said to him, "If you tell about the streets again that you do not believe this or that revelation, I will walk on your neck, sir." At the same time smiting his fist to evince his great rage. He talked of dissenters and cited us to the case of Judas, saying that Peter told him in a conversation a few days ago that he himself hung Judas for betraying Christ.
The Bible has Jesus telling his disciples to love their enemies, but Smith said they killed them. Some might be tempted to write off Peck's testimony as just that of another apostate, but a similar claim was made years later by Apostle Heber C. Kimball.
Judas lost that saving principle, and they took him and killed him. It is said in the Bible that his bowels gushed out, but they actually kicked him until his bowels came out. I know the day is right at hand when men will forfeit their priesthood and turn against us and against the covenants they have made, and they will be destroyed as Judas was.
President of the 12 Apostles, Thomas B. Marsh, gave a sworn affidavit describing the Mormons' actions in 1838.
They passed a decree that no Mormon dissenter should leave Caldwell County alive, and that such as attempted to do it should be shot down and sent to tell their tale in eternity. In a conversation between Dr. Avard and other Mormons, said Avard proposed to start a pestilence among the Gentiles, as he called them, by poisoning their corn, fruit, etc., and saying it was the work of the Lord. And said Avard advocated lying for the support of their religion, and said it was no harm to lie for the Lord. The plan of said Smith, the prophet, is to take this state, and he professes to his people to intend taking the United States and ultimately the whole world. I have heard the prophet say that he should yet tread down his enemies and walk over their dead bodies, that if he was not let alone, he would be a second Muhammad to his generation, and that he would make it one gore of blood from the Rocky Mountains to the Atlantic Ocean.
Apostle Orson Hyde gave an affidavit the same day in which he said he knew most of what Marsh said to be true and believed the rest of what he said to be true. The modern church ignores the affidavits and insists that Marsh left the church over a disagreement about milk strippings.
Thomas B. Marsh, the first president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles in this dispensation, elected to take offense over an issue as inconsequential as milk strippings.
David Whitmer would later write,
"If you believe my testimony to the Book of Mormon, if you believe that God spake to us 3 witnesses by his own voice, then I tell you that in June 1838 God spake to me again by his own voice from the heavens, and told me to separate myself from among the latter-day saints, for as they sought to do unto me, should it be done unto them."
Just as the Book of Mormon witnesses and several apostles broke with Smith, the leader of the Danites eventually did as well. Avard testified in court that Smith was complicit in the threats and had recommended an oath for the group. "In the name of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, I do solemnly obligate myself ever to conceal and never to reveal the secret purposes of this society called the Daughters of Zion. Should I ever do the same, I hold my life as the forfeiture." The church claims that Avard had been acting without Smith's knowledge, but among the 83 signatories threatening Whitmer and Cowdery was Joseph Smith's brother Hiram, who was the assistant president of the church at the time. If there's any question to the church's attitude to those outside, they should consider what Apostle Parley Pratt wrote in the same year.
"All who will not hearken to the Book of Mormon shall be cut off from among the people, and that too in the day it comes forth to the Gentiles and is rejected by them." And not only does this page set the time for the overthrow of our government and all other Gentile governments on the American continent, but the way and means of this utter destruction are clearly foretold. Namely, the remnant of Jacob will go through among the Gentiles and tear them in pieces, like a lion among the flock of sheep. Their hand shall be lifted up upon their adversaries, and all enemies shall be cut off. This destruction includes an utter overthrow and desolation of all cities, forts, and strongholds, an entire annihilation of our race, except such as embrace the covenant and are numbered with Israel. Now, Mr. Sunderland, you have something definite and tangible: the time, the manner, the means, the names, the dates, and I will state as a prophecy that there will not be an unbelieving Gentile upon this continent 50 years hence. And if they are not greatly scourged and in a great measure overthrown within 5 or 10 years from this date, then the Book of Mormon will have proved itself false.
The second member of the First Presidency, who claimed that Joseph Smith had threatened his life, was another assistant president of the church, Dr. John C. Bennett. Among his other positions were Mayor of Nauvoo, Major General of the Nauvoo Legion, Chief Justice of the Municipal Court, and Chancellor of the University of the City of Nauvoo. Bennett was excommunicated in 1842 for seducing women into what he called spiritual wifery. When excommunicated, he issued an affidavit denying Smith's involvement, but soon claimed it was made while Smith was pointing a gun at him. He said under the new order of things, all the property of the saints, with their wives and little ones, is to be consecrated to Joe, to subserve his purposes and gratify his passions. Bennett specifically accused Smith of trying 2 years earlier to seduce the wife of Apostle Orson Pratt while Pratt was away on a mission in England. On hearing the accusation, Orson refused to sustain the prophet and was excommunicated. The church issued a broadside that publicly accused Bennett of not merely trying to seduce Sarah Pratt, but having actually done so. Sarah denied this and would later say,
"When my husband went to England as a missionary, he got the promise from Joseph that I should receive provisions from the tithing house. Shortly afterward, Joseph made his propositions to me, and they enraged me, so that I refused to accept any help from the tithing house or from the bishop. You should bear in mind that Joseph did not think of a marriage or sealing ceremony for many years. He used to state to his intended victims, as he did to me, 'God does not care if we have a good time, if only other people do not know it.' He only introduced a marriage ceremony when he had found out that he could not get certain women without it. I think Louisa Beeman was the first case of this kind. If any woman, like me, opposed his wishes, he used to say, 'Be silent, or I shall ruin your character. My character must be sustained in the interest of the church.'"
Dr. Bennett also accused Smith of sending Porter Rockwell to kill Missouri Governor Lilburn Boggs as retaliation for having driven the Mormons out of Missouri. Numerous witnesses said Smith had prophesied that Boggs would die a violent death within the year. When word of the assassination attempt reached Nauvoo, William Smith's newspaper, The Wasp, carried an anonymous letter to the editor saying, "Who did the noble deed remains to be found out." These were the same issues that eventually led second counselor William Law to break with Smith as well. Law said Smith told him, "I sent Rockwell to kill Boggs, but he missed him. It was a failure. He wounded him instead of sending him to hell." Law also claimed that Smith had tried to seduce his wife Jane. It was the Laws who started another newspaper, the Nauvoo Expositor, to expose Smith. After just one edition, Smith sent hundreds of troops to burn its presses. Few LDS examined why Smith declared it to be a public nuisance. Prominent was the claim that Smith had secretly been engaging in polygamy. Smith said Law was the adulterer and flatly denied the charge.
What a thing it is for a man to be accused of committing adultery and having 7 wives when I can only find 1. I am the same man and as innocent as I was 14 years ago, and I can prove them all perjurers.
The church today admits he was lying.
The exact number of women to whom Joseph Smith was sealed in his lifetime is unknown because the evidence is fragmentary. Careful estimates put the number between 30 and 40.
Though the church admits Smith was lying, they insist he was righteous to do so, because God's standards vary according to the situation. Joseph wrote to President Rigdon's 19-year-old daughter, explaining why she should join him in what she considered to be adultery.
Happiness is the object and design of our existence, and will be the end thereof if we pursue the path that leads to it. And this path is virtue, uprightness, faithfulness, holiness, and keeping all the commandments of God. But we cannot keep all the commandments without first knowing them, and we cannot expect to know all or more than we now know unless we comply with or keep those we have already received. That which is wrong under one circumstance may be, and often is, right under another. God said, "Thou shalt not kill." At another time he said, "Thou shalt utterly destroy." This is the principle upon which the government of heaven is conducted, by revelation, adapted to the circumstances in which the children of the kingdom are placed. Whatever God requires is right, no matter what it is, although we may not see the reason thereof till long after the events transpire.
Among Smith's wives were at least 11 who already had husbands. Some LDS point to a lack of children from Smith's polygamous marriages as evidence that they were not sexual, but only for eternity. There are several problems with such claims. Josephine Lyon gave an affidavit that her mother Sylvia told her on her deathbed that she was really Joseph's daughter. Dr. Brian Hales, in his 3-volume work on Joseph Smith's polygamy, tried to explain this. Even though he could find no evidence, he claims Sylvia must have divorced her husband, Windsor Lyon, before marrying Joseph. After the publication, DNA showed that Josephine was actually Windsor's daughter. To maintain Smith's reputation, Hales now proposes that Sylvia must have cheated on Joseph with her first husband, and then gone back to him after Smith's death. It can't be admitted that Bennett was right, and that Smith's polygamy included his followers sharing their wives with him. After Joseph's death, his wives were also married for time to other general authorities, even though they never divorced their other husbands. On February 2, 1846, Zena Jacobs was married to Brigham Young for time and resealed to Joseph for eternity, even though her husband was still alive and active in the church. A few months later, Brigham sent him on a mission to England and began to live with her openly as husband and wife. She bore him a daughter in 1850. Orson Pratt's wife, Sarah, said there weren't children by the single women because Dr. Bennett served as Smith's abortionist to keep it all secret. Polygamy would be repeatedly denied in public by the church until 1852. The expositor also alluded to concerns that the laws had with Smith's establishment in March 1844 of what came to be known as the Council of 50. Smith was not only running for President of the United States, but was secretly establishing a theocratic political kingdom with himself as the voice of God. It was claimed that it would be the kingdom of God from the book of Daniel that would destroy all other kingdoms and rule the world. William Clayton recorded that before leaving Nauvoo for the last time, Smith told him to burn or hide the council's minutes. He hid them, and the church kept them from the public until 2010. They were eventually published in 2016 and reveal that the committee was bound by an oath of secrecy. It was said that the man who broke the rule should lose his head. LDS today will often claim that the committee was simply preparing for the millennial reign of Christ, but the minutes show that Smith had himself declared king on April 11, 1844. He was already in charge of the Nauvoo Legion with well over 2,500 men under arms. This was at a time when the standing U.S. Army only had 8,500. Smith was still under indictment in Missouri for treason. Setting up a political kingdom within the borders of the United States would have been considered yet another act of treason. The public nuisance of the Nauvoo Expositor was not that it was lying about Smith, but revealing the polygamy and treason about which he didn't want the world to know. It's worth noting that William and Jane Law continued to believe in the Book of Mormon, but they knew it condemned the polygamy and secret combinations that Smith had now embraced. Among all the charges and countercharges going about among the early Mormon leaders was one about which few modern saints are aware: counterfeiting, or as it was commonly called, bogus making. In the 19th century, this involved not just paper money, but coins as well. Gold or silver was plated over base metals or alloyed with them. Smith accused Cowdery, Whitmer, Johnson, and Boynton of counterfeiting in Kirtland, and Bennett and Law of counterfeiting in Nauvoo. Smith admitted Nauvoo was infested with blacklegs, counterfeiters, and debauchees, but he insisted it was his enemies who were the guilty. But despite denying his own involvement, it's striking how many other counterfeiters were in his company. Isaac Glenn was already known as a counterfeiter when he wrote to Smith in the Liberty Jail about land available in and around Hancock County, Illinois. After Smith escaped, he went there and established Nauvoo, buying land for $2 an acre and selling it to his followers at much higher prices. Glenn was baptized into the church and served as Smith's secretary and real estate agent for over a year. In the Council of 50 was Peter Halls, who Brigham Young would later claim to have rebuked for dealing in counterfeit money, along with Theodore Turley, who would be indicted for counterfeiting as well. Smith included non-Mormon members in the Council of 50. One was Gilbert Eaton, who was under indictment for counterfeiting in New York when made a member. Another was Edward Bonney, who was a fugitive from Indiana where he had escaped custody on counterfeiting charges. Smith not only made him a member of the council, but his aide-de-camp in the Nauvoo Legion. Bonney would later accuse Smith of counterfeiting and sheltering criminals in Nauvoo, where he controlled the courts. Another of the non-Mormon members of the Council of 50 was accused counterfeiter Joseph Jackson. On June 1, 1844, he wrote a letter to the editor of the Warsaw Signal that he had presented himself to Smith as an outlaw and fugitive. He was not only made a member of the council, but lived in Smith's home and filled Gallon's old post as Smith's real estate agent. He said Smith had admitted to sending Porter Rockwell to kill Governor Boggs and offered him $3,000 if he would finish the job and free Rockwell. He also accused Smith of counterfeiting and would later say that Smith admitted to counterfeiting in Kirtland, but the bank collapsed before he could complete his plans. In the Nauvoo Expositor, William Law referred to Jackson's letter and expressed his belief in the truth of Jackson's charges. The dissenters during Smith's lifetime included the 3 original witnesses to the Book of Mormon, all of the 8 secondary witnesses who weren't Smith's family, 5 members of the First Presidency, and 8 of the original 12 apostles. Many of them accused Smith of using religion as a means of excusing his adultery, counterfeiting, and murder. Modern defenders of Joseph Smith claim that there were many others who attested to Smith's good character. What's striking is that how after Smith's death these faithful began to accuse one another of the very things the dissenters accused Smith. In December 1844, Sidney Rigdon's messenger and advocate denounced Brigham and the rest of the apostles as that band of bogus makers and adulterers at Nauvoo. This made the 4th member of the First Presidency to accuse the church leadership of counterfeiting. William Smith accused Brigham and his followers of being guilty of murders, treason, adultery, fornication, robbery, counterfeiting, swindling, blasphemy, and usurpation of power. On December 18, 1845, a federal grand jury issued an indictment for counterfeiting against Theodore Turley, Apostles Brigham Young, Willard Richards, John Taylor, Parley Pratt, and Orson Hyde, Council of 50 members Peter Halls, Gilbert Eaton, Joseph Jackson, and Edward Bonney. Mormon historian B.H. Roberts called the indictment a ploy to hasten the Mormons' departure from Illinois. But Theodore Turley, a member of the 70, was one of the witnesses Smith had called against William and Wilson Law, saying that they had brought him counterfeit dies to fix. Joseph's brother, Apostle William Smith, said, "Turley was as notorious a counterfeiter as ever walked the earth." Brigham was known as the colleague of Turley in the counterfeiting business. If the LDS don't want to believe the accusations made by President Sidney Rigdon and Apostle William Smith against Brigham, they should consider Mary Eddy Smith's description of her exodus from Nauvoo for Salt Lake City.
When we were on the route through Iowa, it occurred that one day when one of the wagons was upset, the press for making bogus money rolled into sight and was seen by many Mormons who, till then, had not supposed they were one of a gang of counterfeiters.
There was also a federal raid on the tithing house in Salt Lake City in 1859. It revealed counterfeit plates and led to the conviction and imprisonment of Brigham's secretary, David McKenzie. There's also the matter of the gold coins that Brigham started making in 1849. A $10 gold piece made headlines in 2014 when it sold for $705,000. What didn't make the news was why the coins are so scarce. Soon after they were issued, some were assayed. Despite bearing the motto, "Holiness to the Lord," they weren't the pure gold they claimed to be. Instead of a $20 gold piece having $20 worth of gold, it only had a little over $17 worth. People ceased to take Brigham's word that they were what they claimed to be, and most of the coins were melted to determine their true worth. As to accusations against Brigham, there's also the issue of him at least covering up and celebrating the massacre of over 120 men, women, and children at Mountain Meadows. William Smith said,
"I have no doubt whatever of the truth of the charges against the Mormon people, of having committed the most wanton and cruel murders in the disguise of Indians. And if the spirits of their victims now sleeping in their graves at Nauvoo could but speak to the world, they would reveal tales of cruelty and horror which would make the people stand aghast and cause these murderous, guilty Mormon rebels to quake with fear and possibly to recoil at the contemplation of their own wickedness."
Please note the date. This was written before the Mountain Meadows massacre and was referring to other murders that Brigham blamed on the Indians. It's hard to defend Joseph Smith against the accusations of the dissenters when Brigham Young was also credibly accused of adultery, counterfeiting, and murder. That leaves the Smith family to testify to Joseph's character. Though some accuse them of counterfeiting and polygamy, it's worth noting that all Joseph's immediate family, with the exception of Hiram's widow, soon allied themselves with James Jesse Strang. Strang produced a postmarked letter purportedly written by Joseph Smith 9 days before his death, naming him as his successor. He claimed an angel visited him at the time of Smith's death, and then again later to show him the location of lost ancient records. On September 13, 1845, he took 4 witnesses with him and invited them to inspect the ground under an oak tree about a foot in diameter. Finding no evidence of the ground being disturbed, they dug down to find a clay jar with 3 brass plates that Strang said were the record of Raja Manchu of Verito. His followers included Joseph's mother, Lucy Mack Smith, Book of Mormon witnesses John and David Whitmer, Martin Harris, and Hiram Page, along with apostles John E. Page, William E. McClellan, William Smith, and possibly even Oliver Cowdery. To many Latter-day Saints, the accusations of the dissenters and the trustworthiness of the faithful don't really matter, because they insist that Smith went as a lamb to the slaughter at the Carthage Jail. The problem is that Smith didn't exactly go as a lamb to the slaughter. He had declared martial law and called out the Nauvoo Legion to prevent his arrest. The charge of riot, for which he eventually surrendered, had a bail of only $500. He could have paid that and been released, but on his arrival in Carthage, a new charge of treason was made for which there was no bail. Allen Stout, a member of the Nauvoo Legion, said that Smith ordered the Legion to rescue him, only to have the commander, Jonathan Dunham, ignore the order. One of Smith's jailers said that when he heard the first shots outside, Smith told him, "Don't trouble yourself. They've come to rescue me." The church dismisses all this, but there's also the testimony of Apostle John Taylor describing Smith when it turned out not to be the Nauvoo Legion.
Pulling the 6-shooter left by Brother Wheelock from his pocket, he opened the door slightly and snapped the pistol 6 successive times. Only 3 of the barrels, however, were discharged. I afterwards understood that 2 or 3 were wounded by these discharges, 2 of whom, I am informed, died.
Despite all the evidence to the contrary, the Joseph Smith proclaimed by the modern Mormon Church did go as a lamb to the slaughter. They say he was completely righteous.
If any hope to find a particle of evil in one so pure as Joseph Smith, they will find, as the Lord said, that their hope shall be blasted, and their prospects shall melt away as the hoar frost melteth before the burning rays of the rising sun. Any evil they think they may find in Joseph Smith, no matter how widely believed, will be a lie, for he was righteous and pure.
Remember, this is the same church that claims Brigham Young as its prophet, but makes films portraying Emma as a model wife. It glosses over Brigham saying she twice tried to poison Joseph, and that Joseph called her the wickedest woman on the face of the earth. Our purpose in making this video is to show that the Mormon Church isn't promoting the real Joseph Smith, but far, far more importantly, it's also not promoting the real Jesus. The Jesus of the Bible isn't our elder spirit brother, whose great concern is that we avoid coffee. He is someone far, far, far greater. If you're a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we call on you not to test the Bible by what the Mormon Church teaches you, but what they teach you by the Bible. God bears you his testimony there, that Joseph Smith was a false prophet who preached a different God and a different gospel. We have made several videos to help you see the truth. If you have already rejected Joseph Smith, we implore you not to throw out Jesus as well, but to examine all the evidence. Mormonism can't stand up to its critics, but neither can atheism. Like Mormonism, it can tell you what you want to hear, but it becomes absurd with even a little scrutiny. The Bible is not the self-contradictory mess Mormons and atheists make it out to be. We don't ask you to pray for a burning in your bosom, but to listen to the Bible for what it actually says rather than what others tell you about it. The only ones who should have anything to fear from the truth are liars. Liars like Joseph Smith.